I think the best unit on the field for the Arkansas-Texas A&M game is the Texas A&M defense, and I do believe that's true. However, you can't help but notice that A&M is not the same team offensively it would have been. They also may be a little bit banged up at receiver this week. Keep that in mind there too. But A&M is not the same team seemingly offensively it would have been had Haynes King not gone down with the injury. So now you got a guy in Zach Calzada who was obviously the backup. Like, this was one of those things. It was one of those manufactured quarterback competitions that, was, kind of going through the motions on that. But it was fairly clear and fairly obvious that King was going to be the guy that gave A&M the best option. He won the competition fairly handily, it certainly seems like. So in absence of him, Calzada is clearly a step down in that regard right now. And he's facing a very good defensive coordinator on the side in Barry Odom. And you kind of think that maybe Odom this year at Arkansas has a little bit more of the personnel that he kind of wants to use. I mean, they were in a situation last year where they were playing like almost like a 3-2-6 or something like that, where they're, they just didn't have a lot of front seven personnel a year ago. So they kind of play 6 defensive backs to just get their best 11 guys on the field. That's kind of the thing that Arkansas was doing a year ago. And so for a sharp defensive coordinator who's gotten a lot of praise, who Sam Pittman worked very hard in this offseason to keep. Remember, Texas came after him and threw a bunch of money, and Pittman convinced him to stay at Arkansas for actually less money than he could have gotten if he left. If you're one of those folks who obviously likes Pittman, we all do, but if you're one of those people who also wants to see Pittman pull the upset against A&M on Saturday, this is the matchup you've got to really be watching for. And this is the matchup you've got to really be looking to see the Razorbacks exploit ahead of next Saturday's game against Georgia. Can the diabolical defensive mind of Barry Odom design something that keeps Calzada guessing? This is a young, inexperienced quarterback who is destined to be the backup, and Haynes King not gotten injured. So if you're looking for the Arkansas upset here, it's not a huge point spread. It's moved in the direction of the Hogs a little bit over the course of the week. But if you're looking for that upset, either an outright win or you just want Arkansas plus the points, Odom, what he does against the A&M backup, forced into starting duty here, that's probably the place that you're looking to really zero in on as your real chance and all of that. So we'll take more of your comments throughout the day here as a part of our 1st and 15 crowd at DawgNation.com on the DawgNation app, and as our Facebook and YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch audiences join us. We appreciate all of you being here too. Quick rundown of what you're going to see. Georgia late last night. I was definitely already asleep when this went down. Asleep on the couch, but still asleep nonetheless. I wasn't sleeping on the couch. I just fall asleep on the couch every night and then stumble into the bedroom after that. The point is, I missed the commitment last night from Bo Hughley. Very, very impressive 2023 prospect. We'll talk about that on today's show. We will let you hear some pretty troubling words from Kirk Herbstreit. Georgia fans thinking about the cocktail party won't like the warning that Herbstreit has given to UGA. We'll talk about that on today's program. I'm going to highlight Brock Bowers for a specific reason here today. Some fun stuff from Kirby on a completely different topic before the show is done. Also, UGA doing a pretty good job of highlighting its fans as you return back to the scene of the crime. One of the great takeovers for Georgia fans who travel so well. How many will we see in Nashville on Saturday? It seems like Georgia has a little bit of an idea about this. So we'll do all of that before we're done. Jeff Sintel stopping by as well. DawgNation Daily. We are good, right? We're on the platforms. All right, good. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the things I sometimes think is my duty, obligation around here is to make you aware of everything that's being said nationally about Georgia. Sometimes we kind of pull back outside, as I call it, the bubble of DawgNation, and we give you the national opinion on UGA, because sometimes there is insight to be gained from people who are kind of viewing this from the 10,000-foot spot, as opposed to our very zeroed in, very much under the microscope viewpoint that we all kind of see things from around here. Sometimes, though, it's not necessarily that way, and sometimes, though, it's the kind of take that makes you roll your eyes. Maybe an example of the latter here when it comes to ESPN's Kirk Herbstreit. Now, let me just say one thing here for a moment about Herbstreit, and then I'm going to let you play audio that probably annoy you just a little bit. So trigger warning here on that before we play it. Like, you can be upset with Herbstreit about what you're about to hear, but you can't say that Herbstreit's like an anti-UGA guy. Herbstreit very much argued for Georgia making the 2018 playoff, actually kind of argued for Georgia being one of the 4 best teams at the end of last season when it wasn't even a consideration that Georgia would make the playoff, but he was touting Georgia along with Oklahoma on the playoff show when the Final Four was announced a year ago. So Herbstreit, I would say, generally speaking, is a little bit more of a pro-UGA guy than not. So it's not going to be some sort of anti-UGA bias here, I don't believe, in the person of Kirk Herbstreit. But when he made an appearance on the ESPN podcast, the college football podcast this week, kind of going around the country and giving thoughts in the big games, Herbstreit, like Florida fans themselves, apparently took a lot from the Gators in their close loss to Alabama. And in fact, what's interesting here is Herbstreit took what he saw in Gainesville with Florida coming up short against Alabama and used this to point the finger directly at Georgia and saying, be careful, dogs, when it comes to Florida in Jacksonville and in this race for the SEC East that apparently Kirk and some of his colleagues there thought was a foregone conclusion that Georgia was going to win, and now Herbstreit's not quite so sure. So before we do anything else today, let me give you a little bit here of Kirk Herbstreit maybe taking a step back on his belief that Georgia would be an easy winner of the SEC East on the basis of a game that Florida lost. Here's Kirk Herbstreit.
I didn't take away from it like what's wrong necessarily with Alabama. I took away from it like, damn, there goes Dan Mullen again.
Yep.
There goes Dan Mullen. There's Dan Mullen reminding people he is a great coach. And I walked away thinking, okay, Georgia. Okay, we were already putting you in Atlanta. That's a mistake. We just always get reminders in the sport. Like, just when you think I know, you don't know. You really don't.
So I want to make one thing pretty clear here just to make sure we're on the same page. When Herbstreit says it was a mistake to put Georgia in Atlanta, it doesn't mean he thinks that Florida's not going to win the SEC East. What he means by that is, because the rest of the comment, which I just don't have time to play, made this a little bit more clear, that it was a mistake to assume it was going to be easy for Georgia to win the SEC East. And on that point alone, on this show, we're 100% in agreement. We've been telling you now for really several months that there were some people that tried to make it sound like the Florida was simply going to fall off the face of the earth because it lost Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney and guys like that off last year's team. And we've said openly, we don't have any problem. Yeah, if I pulled my pullover off today, you'd see I have the Gator Hater shirt on underneath what I'm wearing today. That we don't have any problem saying that we would like for it to be true that Florida was terrible. That would be our preference. That'd be our wish around here. We are truly Gator haters. We think all Georgia fans should be. So we want Florida to be bad, but just because we want it to be true doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be true. And, for like guys like Phil Steele and maybe some other folks, ESPN types, who had Florida out of the preseason top 25, we called that out as a mistake at the time, and I think we've been proven correct by having thought that. So if Herbstreit says, "Oh, be careful," assuming that the trek through the SEC East for Georgia is going to be easy, totally fine with all of that. Like the one thing that I do just genuinely disagree with, though, is the idea that the SEC East race has been completely reframed now because Florida played a close game in a loss to Alabama. I think that's taking things a little bit too far because I frankly wasn't all that surprised by what I saw from Florida against Alabama. We thought that Alabama had a chance to sleepwalk through that game. We've seen the Crimson Tide do that in similar spots before. Alabama, I believe, will now shake that off, and after playing Southern Miss this week, we'll probably go on another run in the SEC West, similar to some of the things they've kind of done in the past. That's just kind of what I assume is going to happen there. But I think a lot of the overpraise of Florida that you may have heard over the course of the last 6 days or so, I think a lot of that's just generated by the fact that some folks were kind of napping and not fully appreciating what this game had the chance to be. When it was 21-3 early between Florida and Alabama a week ago, that's the kind of snapshot that I think a lot of people just assumed the entire game was going to look like, because I think there were a lot of national types that didn't quite do their homework going into Alabama and Florida, because when Alabama's on top, it's easy to think they win every game easily. But when you really look at what happens in SEC play over the course of the last 4 years, it ain't always quite that way. And this one sort of set up to be a little bit more like that than some of the people who didn't maybe do their homework on this game probably assumed it was going to be. However, the other thing that Herbstreit kind of touches on there, and I think this is so important, and this is, I think, the thing for a Georgia fan that you really take from this, is that Herbstreit kind of reinforces the opinion of, oh my gosh, Dan Mullins, I think at one point in time in the podcast. Like I said, I don't have time to play like the whole thing. But at one point in time, the podcast, Herbstreit calls Mullen, this magician, this guy that just finds a way to sort of carve up this scheme and dial all this kind of stuff up. And boy, he just finds a way to, whatever talent you give him, he finds a way to get the most out of it. I mean, that's the kind of praise that Dan Mullen receives. And in a roundabout way, there's kind of like a backhanded compliment on the other side of that when it comes to Georgia of, well, Georgia collects all this talent, but Dan Mullen coaches his talent up. That's the caricature that gets drawn. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why I say all the time that for Georgia, the Florida game is so important, because you don't want that narrative to fester. You don't want that narrative to have any legs whatsoever, that Dan Mullen does more with his lesser talent than you do with your superior talent. That's why Kirby Smart ought to have great motivation. I believe that he does, but he ought to have great motivation to want to go out and squash the Gators, because squashing that talking point is really, really important for Georgia. When Mullen found a way to win that game a year ago, it just gave life to it, that he may have lesser players, but he gets more out of them. You don't want that to have be said about your best and most important rival. So Georgia's got a lot to play for when it plays Florida here this year. But beyond that, I think it's also important to point out when certain things may not quite be true. This notion that somehow Georgia is just throwing a bunch of talent on the field and letting them figure it out during the game. I think if you're watching Georgia very closely right now, I think that you're saying, no, I believe right now Georgia's actually a lot more than that. I mean, I don't think you create a defense as dynamic as what Georgia's has proven to be through 3 games through sheer talent alone. Because the truth is, Georgia's always been talented defensively. But now the defense that in the past may have been stingy is all of a sudden now unleashed and unlocked, and it is allowed to be aggressive. It's allowed to sack quarterbacks. And Georgia, in that game against Clemson week 1, it probably doesn't win the game, or at least had a very good chance of not winning that game had it not been as effective at getting the quarterback as it turned out to be. And that's not just 5 stars who are getting that done, although there were a lot of elite recruits who contributed to the defensive performance that day. It's also a guy in Dan Lanning who is coming into his own. Remember, Georgia kept Lanning over the offseason. Lanning had a chance to go be Texas defensive coordinator and turn that opportunity down. Georgia kept him. We said at the time it was one of the biggest offseason stories of the year for Dan Lanning, because Lanning's personality as a coach came shining through a year ago. Not a great year for Georgia defensively, but they were better getting after quarterbacks than they had been at any point in time previous to that. That has carried over here to 2021. So it's not just talented players that are allowing this Georgia front seven to be as dominant as it has been. It is a scheme that is now willing to unleash them and mitigate the risks that come with that. Because obviously, anybody's secondary, Georgia's maybe has a couple of extra issues here, but anyone's secondary is going to be put in more harm's way if you allow your front seven to be as aggressive as Georgia's is currently being. But a good coach finds a way to mitigate against that. For the most part, that's exactly what Georgia's doing. So it's not just talent that is the story for the Georgia defensive performance. It's also the coaching scheme and the way that Dan Lanning, the defensive coordinator, is deploying that talent right now. It's not just, in other words, Dan Mullen, who's the only coach in the SEC East who has a chance to be a magician. Some of the stuff that guy like that Lanning's doing seems pretty magical right now, too. To say nothing of what's happening for Georgia on offense. Yes, the Dogs weren't very good against Clemson week 1, but we said in the weeks after that, Georgia had a chance to get better. Georgia had a chance to improve. Against UAB, against South Carolina, I would say that has been happening. At the rate that some Georgia fans want it to, maybe, maybe not. They'd have to tell you themselves. But going into the Vanderbilt game on Saturday, Georgia, to me, is on schedule for the improvement I was hoping to see from it, with all those very tough games in the month of October, starting next Saturday when Arkansas comes into Sanford Stadium. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why I'll have very close eyes on the Vanderbilt game this Saturday. It may seem like a boring game, but the truth is boring people are bored. That there's actually, if you really look more closely at the game, you see a chance for Georgia to win easily, which is not always as easy as it looks sometimes in the SEC. You see another chance for Todd Monken to continue to assert himself in what has been, I would say, a pretty clever deployment of Georgia talent on offense right now there too. So Georgia fans kind of, roll their eyes at Kirk Herbstreit, loving on Dan Mullen and giving Georgia a warning saying, watch out for Florida. The honest truth is Georgia was already watching out for Florida. Florida will have Georgia's full attention on October 30, and if the media is just now catching up to all this, that's not Georgia's fault, that's the media's fault. But as far as what's actually happening with UGA right now, it's not just talent alone getting this done for Georgia. I think Dan Lanning, Freudian slip there, and apologies to Lanning for putting him in that company. I think what Dan Lanning is doing defensively, what I think I see Todd Monken doing offensively with more improvement maybe still yet to come here against Vanderbilt, I think the X's and O's advantage those two coordinators giving Georgia right now are just fine in comparison to anything anyone else is doing in the SEC, Dan Mullen at Florida included. Now, with that said, let me completely shift gears to something else just for a moment. I want to talk about a Georgia player in particular, and if you want to think about the ways in which the chess match for Georgia is working out pretty well, think about the ways in which Todd Monken, the Georgia offensive coordinator, is utilizing tight end Brock Bowers. This is an example of a coaching scheme that's really working because Georgia's getting as much out of Bowers right now through 3 games, certainly to begin his Georgia career, as it's probably gotten from anybody in this spot since the start of the Kirby Smart era going back to 2016. And it was kind of a funny moment earlier this week when Georgia quarterback JT Daniels was asked about the infusion of talent from the state of California on the Georgia roster, Daniels himself included. And for a brief moment, he forgot the fact that Bowers kind of belongs in that group. This is short, it's funny, and it sets us up for something else. Here's JT Daniels and Brock Bowers.
I was going to say, I thought it was just me and Kendall. No, I totally forgot Brock. Brock's from, he's a NorCal kid. It just didn't come to mind. But yeah, no, we definitely have a good California impact.
So for a moment there, Daniels kind of forgets about Brock Bowers when looking at the roster of players from the state of California. But one thing that Daniels has not been doing is forgetting about Bowers on the field. I think you can say that Bowers has been the most trusted, dependable target for this Georgia offense all season long when Daniels has been throwing. When it was Stetson Bennett during the UAB game, the numbers for Bowers so far this year, 14 catches for 203 yards. He's already got 2 touchdowns. Now, the high water mark for any pass catcher in the Smart era is what George Pickens did as a freshman back in 2019. So kind of ironic that what Bowers is pushing for here is not just the top receiver total that Pickens produced, but the fact that he also produced it in a freshman season makes the comparison here pretty interesting. That particular year, Pickens had 49 catches for 727 yards and 8 touchdowns. It is absolutely conceivable that Brock Bowers could match or exceed those numbers as the season continues. And some of this is clearly about the fact that Brock Bowers is a sensational athlete. I mean, I would say that his athleticism, having seen him on the field, is even greater than I assumed it would be. There was a lot of buzz about Bowers during the offseason, but the actual performance and the way in which Bowers has gotten it done has even exceeded the expectation that I had for him based on some of the whispers sometimes off the record that you kind of heard about Brock Bowers leading the start of the season. But to me, this is also an example of a guy being used well. And there's a way to just not use tight ends effectively. Unfortunately, maybe Georgia fans feel like they've seen some of that kind of stuff before. And Bowers' athleticism alone isn't enough to get him open. You've got to have a clever scheme that creates that for him. And I would say that's kind of going on for Georgia right now. Now, when Kirby Smart talked about this on Monday, he said, listen, a lot of this ends up being about the kind of guy that you have playing the position, being the kind of guy you want to use. But either way, there's a lot about what Georgia's doing with Brock Bowers right now that looks awful similar to what a lot of those NFL teams are now doing on Sundays too, and Smart did talk a little bit about that. Here is Kirby.
Yeah, I think it's just based on who the tight end is. Like, he can also play on special teams. He can run, he can catch, he can run after catch. He can block maybe a little, maybe a lot, depending on who it is. The tight end position has evolved in the NFL, therefore it's trickled down to high school and college offenses. But it's really about who the guy is, right? It's not like everybody wants to just say, well, the tight ends are getting used more. Well, if you got a tight end that runs 4.5, then he presents a viable option. It's a threat in the passing game, and if he's physical and tough enough to block and block on the perimeter, I mean, you give me any player who's 235 pounds and can run 4.5, then we'll find a way to use him. And I think that has a lot to do with his skill set.
So when I look ahead to the Vanderbilt game on Saturday, I think maybe the single most interesting name of any of the Georgia players I'm curious of seeing, Brock Bowers may actually be that guy. I am curious to see if he takes another step towards being the kind of receiver for Georgia in 2021 that George Pickens was as a freshman in 2019. The touchdown total, the overall yardage total, the number of times he's getting targeted. Does this truly continue? Because if it does, as Kirby Smart alluded to, that when you're schematically using your tight end that well, all of a sudden defenses have to completely reconfigure the way they're defending you. And all of a sudden, more matchup opportunities are created for Georgia's other pass-catching targets. In a lot of cases, that's going to be very talented receivers who may all of a sudden find their counterpart on the defensive side a little bit more favorable matchup because of what teams are having to do to consider what Brock Bowers is doing. And that's, by the way, before a guy like Darnell Washington even comes back into the fold, expected to return back from injury again pretty soon. So it's pretty clear that Bowers is a unique talent. His athleticism to go along with his size, that makes him somewhat special. But it's also pretty special right now how Georgia's choosing to use him. When you think about matching wits with a guy like Dan Mullen or Todd Grantham on the defensive side of the ball or any of the other chess matches that Kirby Smart and his staff are going to face the rest of the season, deploying a guy like Bowers as effectively for the rest of the season as Georgia has for these first 3 games, that could be a big step towards a championship for the Dogs as the season progresses. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, starting at 9:45 with our First and 15 at DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 963F, the podcast player, Apple, Spotify, everything in between. We're just really happy to have you for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger today. And as I said before, big thanks to our friends at Kroger making it all possible. You can make your tailgate a triumph right now with big savings on all the items that you need to enjoy tailgating. Whether it's a Friday night, Saturday, or Sunday tailgate, Kroger's got you covered for all of it. Big savings on those barbecue supplies, the food that goes on the table, the drinks that go in the cooler, everything else there. You can go to Kroger.com/football to find out more about that. Kroger.com/football to find out more about that. I'll also give you a quick reminder that if you go to the DawgNation YouTube page right now, really fun series of videos that I did, Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley, we did with Chef John from Kroger. Really fun stuff looking at ways in which you can kind of kick your tailgate up to the next level. This was actually, I thought it turned out really well. We did these a few weeks ago. It was really fun, and I got a chance to enjoy some delicious ribs from the chef there from Kroger's. That was really fun, cool stuff. So go to the DawgNation YouTube page. You can see more of that for yourself there today. For those of you watching us right now on YouTube, we appreciate you being there with us on that too. So it'll be Jeff Sintel coming up. We'll go on the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff, and we'll get an update on all of the latest with UGA recruiting. Big visit weekend last weekend. A lot of guys kind of making their movement towards some decisions. We'll cover a lot of that with Jeff here. Also, as a preview for that, let me also mention a name as we go around the doghouse. Delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. Late last night, Georgia got a commit from a 2023 offensive lineman, Bo Hughley. Let me show you the really cool edit that Hughley kind of puts out there on that. It says, I want to thank all the coaches that have ever played for in my life. I'd love to thank my parents. I'd also like to thank Kirby Smart for this chance, but I'll be taking all my talents to the University of Georgia, of course, the product out of Langston Hughes High School in the Atlanta area. Total candor here for a moment, that for whatever reason, for as insatiable an appetite as the college football fan typically has for his team's current recruiting class, Georgia fans no different on this, there is usually a little bit less of an appetite for that 2023 guy, the next cycle. Sometimes you have to kind of shake people out of their slumber a little bit, and literally last night that may have been the case at midnight with most of us sleeping when Hughley made his announcement. But you have to kind of shake people out of their slumber to let them know, hey, this is a pretty big deal. And in the case of Hughley, that is definitely the case. I mean, if you look at the 24/7 Sports composite right now, this is the number 72 player nationally for the 2023 cycle. This is the number 6 offensive tackle. This is a guy who already checks in at 6'7", 290. You want these big tackles in the Georgia program, and it's harder to find those, right? I think Hughley definitely kind of checks that box there. This is one of the top players in the state of Georgia for the class of 2023. So this is a pretty big-time addition for Georgia, and we'll let Jeff Sintel tell us more about this here in a moment. But not every commit's created equal. Some of them are going to matter to you more so than others. That's just a fact. And this is one of those that in the midst of the season, with you thinking about Georgia on the field, or with you maybe kind of prioritizing some of the 2022 names right now, it's important to note when Georgia gets one that's going to be a very important bedrock piece of the future recruiting class, because you fast forward to a few months, a lot of you will have acquainted yourselves a lot more with Hughley there at that time, and you'll realize that Georgia has really added itself a big piece by getting them there to a day. And it was great to see him pull the trigger on that commitment there last night. Hope you'll pull the trigger on some great pizza choices as we head towards the weekend. And that's Marco's Pizza. That's why they deliver around the doghouse to us each and every Friday. And they can be delivering great pizza for you as you head towards the weekend there, too. I'm talking about the mouth-watering golden brown crust. It's always baked perfectly. The 3 melty cheeses that are melted and gooey on top. You love that. The old world toppings, the pepperoni, the sausage, everything else. That is what Marco's Pizza is famous for. True, authentic flavor. It's in every bite of a Marco's Pizza. Also, the great savings there as well, including a bundle of options that really can feed an entire family. How about a large one-topping pizza, a pizza bowl, which is the pizza flavor without the crust, which is, if you think about it, a pretty amazing piece of technology, and the cheesy bread there as well. It's all just $21.99. So big savings on the large one-topping pizza, the pizza bowl, the cheesy bread, just $21.99 for all of that. You go to the Marco's app or marcos.com to find out more about that. Participation does vary, so check out the website and your local store for more details on all of that. But ultimately, just enjoy yourself some Marco's Pizza here this weekend, because when it comes to Marco's Pizza, pizza lovers get it. All right, before we're done, good stuff from Georgia this week, highlighting the performance of Georgia fans. The last time the Dogs went to Nashville, will we see a repeat of that here this weekend? We'll find out very shortly. Also, Kirby Smart had a shout-out this week for another former UGA athlete competing in a different sport besides football. I think it's worth getting your attention on this before our show is done. So we'll do all of that here. We'll also have one more big look at the other games of the weekend. But for now on, the latest UGA commit, big addition to the 2023 class late last night. Follow-up to the visitors on hand for the South Carolina game. A big 5-star prospect has made a major move. There is so much to get to. Let's cover all those bases right now as we go on the road with Jeff Sintel, presented by AAA.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, it's Jeff Sintel on the road, assisted by AAA. And boy, Jeff, there was a pretty big announcement late last night when it comes to the 2023 class for Georgia. And what I said before you joined us is that, sometimes you have to really, kind of get people's attention when it comes to a future recruiting cycle. This is one you really want to pay attention to. People just have the natural reaction to think about future classes less prominently than they think about the current recruiting class. That's just fact of life. It's not good or bad. It just is. But in the case of Hughley, this is one that Georgia fans should want to know. This is a bedrock member of this 2023 class of the Dogs, a big, big get as Georgia looks to replenish the depth at its offensive tackle spot. Hughley certainly helps you with all of that, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, you have a good point there, Brandon, and good morning, everybody. It was an early morning for a lot of folks at Dog Nation to celebrate this morning. But, I mean, he's number 72 overall. He's 6'7", he's 290. Brandon, I don't know. I'm going to get video of this soon, but the young man roller skates in his spare time on the weekends. And young man that big is usually putting dudes on roller skates. But seeing a 6'7", 290-pounder roller skate is a side unto itself. But, I mean, you had a good point. I mean, really, it's the next recruiting class, but I'm going to try and frame it up. There's probably only like 5 guys left in the class in the 2022 class that Georgia is recruiting for 2022 that is as highly rated as this kid. He really just converted to an offensive tackle a year ago. He has those measurables. He has the length. He has the size. And really, he's very lean, Brandon. He looks like he's a 280, 290-pound kid, and he looks like that, what he actually is. But, he's going to end up in college playing at like 325, and when he is all that, he's going to be quite the monster.
Yeah, no question about that whatsoever. And, of course, it follows up what seems to be a good bit of recruiting momentum for Georgia here right now, especially after the weekend that was with big names. The Arch Mannings, of course, I think a lot of the folks who are watching on TV got more than their fair share of a chance to see Manning on the screen Saturday night. Of course, Anaya White was on hand there as well. Other big names to consider. What's your kind of immediate post-game takeaway from what Saturday was like for Georgia from a recruiting standpoint, hosting all those big visitors, and seemingly the presumption is those guys all saw a pretty good show?
Yeah, Brandon, we said this on Hedges, and I'm not really one for hyperbole, but knowing everything that's going on behind the scenes in 2022 and 2023 and how Georgia has kind of, you guys will see this phrase a lot in future stories, those first two games, the impactful games against Clemson and now South Carolina, just the fact that they could be in Sanford, they could be on the field, they could witness the light show, it's really moved the needle a lot with Georgia's major recruiting base, the guys that they really have to have in 2022, 2023, and even 2024, in a way that, I mean, Georgia's always had that stuff. They've had wins. They've had recruits in the stands. They've had the lights. They've had a great atmosphere. They've had the undefeated support of Sanford Stadium on a Saturday. The thing is different now is Georgia looks like monsters on the field. The 5-stars are playing like 5-stars. They've been empowered to just go beat the man in front of them and not maybe schematically have a safe scheme. I mean, really, this is what I said on Hedges. Georgia always had 5-stars in the talent base and on the roster, but they didn't always look like there was a clear edge in talent between the teams that they were playing. Maybe that's scheme, maybe that's unleashing the defense, maybe that's havoc, maybe that's not putting the ball in the air as much as recruits like to see. But Georgia is putting down like finish him type Mortal Kombat moves on opponents now on the field, and really that's something what these recruits have been dying to see. It's perhaps the missing piece in what Kirby Smart has been trying to build on the field, on the recruiting trail. It's really all coming to fruition. You see names like Anai White, Ernest Green III, Reuben Owens II, Arch Manning, Christian Miller. You see all these guys, and they're just floored by what Georgia is bringing to the table now. There are going to be names that come to visit Georgia this fall, 5-star Shamar Stewart, Kamari Wilson, and they're all going to see, if they continue to see what Georgia's putting out right now, going to be a very good product.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as you said, to me, it's the most important development for Georgia of all this season because it, to me, is what leads to a championship, but it certainly leads to future UGA recruiting success. People want to see, I'm talking about people, I mean recruits. Recruits want to see talented players utilized. It's not enough to go out there and have good fundamentals and keep the ball in front of you or grade out well. You got to go out there and dominate. And on the offensive side of the ball, that means touchdowns. Jermaine Burton's had a couple the last 2 games. Brock Bowers has a couple already this season. A.D. Mitchell got a touchdown last week. Arian Smith got a touchdown the week before that. That big-time recruits are catching touchdown passes on the offensive side of the ball. They're clearly collecting a bunch of sacks on the defensive side of the ball. That big-time talent through 3 games is being unleashed to create highlight-type plays. And I don't fault recruits for wanting to see that. I don't fault recruits for saying that's my vision for my own college career. And the fact that Georgia is putting that on display is not only a recipe for victories on the field, I think it's also a recipe to kind of reignite some of these passions for Georgia fans who felt like Georgia's name wasn't connected as closely with some of the elite prospects through a lot of the summer. Boy, when you're putting this product on the field for some of those recruits who haven't made up their mind yet, I mean, you certainly get the impression that those recruits are going to notice this.
Yeah, I think, Brennan, let's be very frank. I think we live in a visual world now, or at least these recruits between the ages of 16 and 19 do. And if you give them stats like Georgia's rated number 1 in total defense and number 2 in total defense, or haven't given up a rushing touchdown and yada, 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 I think that will only go so far. But what Georgia's doing, here's a great example, Anai White. Anai White had an official visit to Georgia over the summer. That didn't go so well. Georgia was at the time where Anai White was in town. Danny Dennis Sutton, who would later commit to Penn State, was also a major target at that position. And it was like, okay, where's Georgia going to go? Where is all the love going to go? And with White, he was looking at Alabama. He was looking at Texas A&M and Ohio State. And those are schools that, Ohio State can just point to Larry Johnson's track record with first-round draft picks. Chase Young putting up 10, 12, 15 sacks, looking invincible, looking like an action figure across the fields of the Big Ten. And it's always, we can point to these scores, Brandon. We can point to a South Carolina game, a Kentucky game, a Missouri game, games over the past 2 years where Georgia was like, well, that's a win. It's good. One side of the ball looked good, or this guy looked good, but you don't see guys creating that visual Instagram reel highlight all over the place. Good example is Anai White. Georgia smartly put him and Cooper Manning and Reuben Owens in the front row of one of the boxes of the West End zone. The other box was Bo Hughley. Bo Hughley got kind of front second row boxes for both the UAB and the South Carolina games, but I think everybody saw it on TV. Georgia throws a long touchdown pass Runs right into that west end zone. The Georgia player, I believe it's Mr. Mitchell, runs into that end zone and has a little bit of gesturing with the crowd. Turns out that's right at Anai White. Later on in the game, Anai White is talking to Cooper Manning. I think the lip readers out there would notice Cooper Manning telling Anai White, Georgia's really good or Georgia's pretty good. Those are all these things where Georgia is putting, as well as that light show looks, as well as those black jerseys look, as well as those recruiting rankings look, Georgia looks like that on the field now, and I can't tell you how big of a difference that's making on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, I think that's really pretty interesting. I guess let's do a couple seconds here on Arch Manning. What did you take from his visit? And, I thought it was pretty clever this week, Lane Kiffin kind of having it be known that he only follows Arch Manning on Instagram. That kind of gives you a nature of, kind of how viral this recruitment for the famous last name is going to go. But beyond all of that, Georgia had a chance to make an in-person pitch to Manning this week. How do you think it went?
I think it went great. I think, first of all, with your Lane Kiffin statement, I think it's flighty. I think it doesn't really say anything while saying something. A lot of these recruitments are not conducted via Instagram. I think it shows that where Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss is thinking that a quarterback's going to make the team. I don't think that's what Arch Manning's looking for. I think Arch Manning is looking for a team that can compete for championships. If he had a unofficial, veiled top group, I think teams like Alabama, Clemson, and Georgia are in that top group. I don't think LSU is in that top group. Texas is probably in that top group. And I think what Arch is going to do is he's going to do sort of an old-school way of doing it. He wants to figure out his destination sometime in his junior year, kind of like Trevor Lawrence did. A lot of times we saw recruits 4 or 5 years ago make their decision before their junior year, their junior football season, that is. And Georgia's an undefeated college town. He loves the college town. Public comments have came, whether it's from Eli or his dad Cooper, about how Georgia is a remarkable college town. Now they've got the defense that would get him the ability to play a championship. And I tell you what, Brendan, it would be the most Georgia thing ever. Kind of like maybe what you might see at Oklahoma right now with Spencer Rattler. If he continues to flop a little bit on this big stage, a former number 1 draft pick projection, a former number 1 overall quarterback gets eclipsed by the next big thing in less than 2 recruiting cycles, and the younger guy looks a lot better. I mean, I think the most Georgia thing ever would be somehow trying to figure out if Arch Manning came to Georgia. You want to talk about a quarterback problem that's been well documented before. How in the world would Georgia fans wrap their arms around Arch Manning being added to the talent pool at Georgia's quarterback spot? I know it's a very cliquey name. It's a name that's going to draw a lot of attention. I think he's going to take a visit to Alabama. He's going to take a visit to Clemson. I bet he'll see Texas. And I think by the end of the season in his visits, he'll have a good idea of where he wants to go.
Speaking of having a good idea of where you want to go, there was an interesting move made as of late by the 5-star defensive lineman Bear Alexander. I want to talk to you about that coming up in a moment. Let me, before that, though, remind folks that we're on the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sintel. Jeff and I both on the road here this weekend in Warner Robins tonight, then various places, me, including Nashville on Saturday for the Georgia Vanderbilt game. I'm thankful to have the legendary roadside assistance of AAA when I go, but that's not the only thing that AAA can do to take care of you. If you are a prominent wage earner for your family, if it's your salary that's responsible for taking care of your spouse and for your children, one of the things that you want to think about is what happens in the event that something were to happen to you. What happens if you were gone? How well taken care of would your spouse and your children be with all of that? That's where AAA can step in when it comes to life insurance there as well, because they know in an audience the size of ours, a great percentage of the audience, if something were to happen to you within 6 months, there would be a major financial need for your spouse, for your children, for everything else. And, of course, the AAA Financial Services Associates can help make getting life insurance for you and understanding the coverage options available really simple, and they'll provide you great service there as well. So a couple different ways for you to get in touch. You can give them a call, 866-695-0222. That's 866-695-0222. 222. You can go by and speak to one of your local AAA offices there today and have that conversation in person. You can also ask and find out more online at AAA.com/life. That's AAA.com/life. You can find out more about that. Jeff, I was very interested to see, and I guess there had been some rumblings about this for a while, although I'm not really quite sure what the genesis of this is, that Big Bear Alexander has left the state of Texas, and he'll only now be attending the rest of his senior year at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. What can you tell us about what caused Alexander to want to make the move? And then I guess most importantly, for Georgia going head-to-head with Texas A&M for his services, the fact that he's now no longer in the Lone Star State, how does that change that recruitment?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest story maybe in a couple of days at least on the Georgia recruiting beat. Here's where my mind goes first. I think, let me see if I can count them up. 1, 2, 3. I think this will be his 5th high school in his academic varsity career. And I want to tell everybody to stop right there and just think about a human being for a second. Bayer Alexander has basically been a transitory high school student for most of his life. Never had the chance to put roots down. He's been living in a lot of different places, getting to know a lot of different fan bases and programs and communities, and a lot of that is just by the circumstances in which he grew up around. Didn't have a lot of great family support, any family support. In fact, the family that he had around him at times needed his support more than he needed theirs. And, man, that's incredible to place on a young man, 13, 14, 15, 16 years of age. And now he's going to IMG Academy to play a senior season. And people are so much jump to conclusion. Hot take artists are happening right now on the internet about, he's transferring. Why is he not happy? He's transferring because he wasn't eligible to play by the Texas Interscholastic, their governing body of Texas high school athletics. He wasn't going to get a senior season. So he's transferring to IMG about 4 games into a senior season for IMG just to have that senior year experience. A lot of times he's moved. It's because he's had to move with the guardian and the mentor that has taken over his care since he was in the 8th and 9th grade. And Bayer Alexander himself has told me many times that this gentleman is the difference between what he thinks is being a statistic and maybe being a life and death situation with a life out on the streets where the path he was going on prior to that. So, one job he moved because his guardian and mentor got a chance to coach and teach at this high school. And then Bayer wasn't granted eligibility to this high school. So now he's moving on. I think from the humanities standpoint, I think I've covered that pretty well. From the recruiting, the Texas A&M Georgia tug of war, I think it helps Georgia's favor. I think it helps Georgia's odds in this race. I think this is going to be a situation where his heart might say he wants to go to one school and has to go to another school, and then his head might tell him he has to go to another. There's going to be very creative things happening on name, image, and likeness with a young man whose kind of nickname, and he's already trademarked logos as Big Bear and the Big Bear. He's a great player, 5-star, number 30 overall player in the country. For Georgia fans, this is what I want them to. This is how I see it. The reading of the green, perhaps with this being Ryder Cup week. He's no longer in the state of Texas. He's no longer living around Texas or Texas A&M fans. He's no longer has the ability on a weekend to go to Texas A&M in College Station 2, 3, 4 times this year. IMG plays a national schedule. IMG will play, I think they're in Massachusetts this week. They've got Connecticut. They've got a game in Mississippi. They've got a game in Alabama. They basically travel and play a national schedule. It's going to be very hard for him to visit Texas A&M or Georgia at all. And when he does, he's going to have to make those official visit trips in order to do so. Lastly, Georgia and IMG have a great connection. Georgia currently has about 5 players on the roster, 4 players, I believe, to be exact, that played their varsity football at IMG Academy, most notably 5-star junior deep outside linebacker Nolan Smith. So I'm not saying it swings the odds in Georgia's favor, but it definitely helps Georgia's chances because it takes away the local home field advantage for Texas A&M here in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I want to squeeze in one more thing before we let you go, and that's really interesting stuff when it comes to Bayer Alexander. But speaking of elite recruits, we get a chance to see some tonight on Peachtree TV, streaming on CBS46.com. Rusty Manzella's on assignment tonight. That means Jeff Sentell slides in with me in the broadcast booth there for that game. And, Jeff, we've already presented a lot of great prospects on TV thus far this season. I think Vic Burley, the 2023 defensive lineman, you want to call him that, for Warner Robins, is as interesting as any of them, as good certainly as any of them on the list of, there's maybe not 1 or 2 names on the list that would be ahead of him, but also really interesting prospect there as well. I am very, very excited about showing Burley on TV tonight. And then for Lee County, who's got just big-time prospects all the way around. Really, both these teams are loaded with prospects all the way around. when you think about a freshman running back like Ousmane Kroma, so much of what we've done on TV this year has really been introducing people to the rest of the state, and in some cases it's a national audience that tunes in. I think with this Ousmane Kroma, the freshman running back, I think he's going to be introduced tonight. I think Omar White, the sophomore defensive lineman for Lee County, there are a lot of like 2024s and 2025s in tonight's game that I just think are going to really draw a much bigger following when this game is done tonight. It's going to be great on Peachtree TV, but obviously Burley, one of the headline names there as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, Brandon, you covered the gamut. I wonder if you've got a freshman call in your repertoire tonight, because the young man from the Ivory Coast down there at Lee County, I think he's averaging 13 yards per carry. He's got over 660 yards rushing so far through 5 games this season, 6'1", 200. Victor Burley is a guy, I'll be honest, I don't know if Georgia's in the driver's seat there for Victor Burley. It might be Clemson, it might be Alabama. Georgia's in the mix there. He's 6'5", 270. He'll play some offense. Had 11 sacks a year ago. Different role this year. He's occupying a lot of blockers, freeing up some of his guys to do so. You've got, the stakes on this game, Brandon. This is kind of the peach of a game. Mr. Mandel, our good buddy Rusty, is on assignment, which means, hey, jump in the booth, Jeff. Get the left-hander in the bullpen, and it's kind of like telling the Georgia fan that, hey, your first game is going to be the 2018 Rose Bowl as a Georgia fan. How does that feel? That's sort of what it feels like for me tonight in the booth with you tonight, Brandon. You got 2 number 1 teams. Very rarely see a number 1 team this late in the season because everybody, number 1 versus number 1, everybody's in region play. You've got the defending 5A state champion against the 6A state finalist of a year ago, committed to Power 5 schools on their roster. Warner Robins is just blitzing teams coming out of middle Georgia, and I am ecstatic, stoked, whatever you want to say. I'm going to be hunkered down in that booth ready to watch some great football tonight.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Can't wait for that. And, of course, Jeff, we appreciate you being here on the road with us, assisted by AAA. And as you're on the road tonight, on your way to Warner Robins and a bunch of other stuff here this weekend, be careful doing all of that. I'll see you in the game tonight and then see everybody else in Nashville tomorrow for Georgia Vanderbilt. So thanks so much, Jeff. We'll look forward to what should be a very, very fun weekend.
Yeah, AAA is a good name on everybody's mind, Brandon, because we're all on the road. Everybody drive safe, arrive safe, and get ready to watch some great football this weekend.
See you, Jeff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, really fun stuff. Tonight's game is just going to be outstanding. I really am very excited about it. Lee County's got a tight end going to Arkansas. You're just going to roll through all the names here. Just very, very, very deep on both sides. State championship programs. Lee County's won them before. Went down to the wire with Buford last season. Warner Robins had been close in previous years, got over the hump and won their state championship a year ago. So there are going to be thousands of people in attendance. There's going to be a huge audience on TV. There are, tons and tons of like Power 5 level prospects all over the place here. It's just going to be extraordinary tonight. So I'll see you on Peachtree TV tonight. Jeff Sintel in place of Rusty Manziel, and just a really, really fun game. Good times all the way around. I know Rusty probably hates to miss it too, because I know how much he loves these two teams and how much respect he has really for both coaches and the talent level there. This is as good as it gets, and it's this time of year where you're kind of before you get to that region schedule, and obviously the region game is what determines your postseason fate. But in kind of this first half of the season, a lot of these teams feel a lot of freedom to, hey, we'll travel, we'll find a team that's willing to play us. Some of these very good teams, it's not easy to find a team that wants to play us. So you got to match up with someone as good as you. Otherwise, you just can't get a game. And so in games like this, you can kind of let it all hang out, and that's exactly what Warner Robins and Lee County are going to do tonight. So really fun stuff there. And as you're tuning in to check that out, or as you're checking out any football here this weekend, of course, don't forget Classic City Lager, a great pairing for this. Also, Classic City Lager brings you the classic moment each week. We're going to do something kind of fun with that this week on DawgNation. So it seems like Kirby Smart's got a quarterback controversy every year. Controversy may be the wrong word. There's some quarterback drama seemingly every year. There also was back in 2017 when Georgia played Vanderbilt, at least in the idea, in the mind of then Commodores coach Derek Mason. So that'll be the subject of our Classic Moment this week, presented by Classic City Lager. Y'all check that out on the DawgNation video channels, and get yourself some 6 and 12-pack cans of Classic City Lager wherever you're shopping here this weekend. It's just good cold beer, lager-style beer, but no sacrifice on flavor. It's a craft-style lager, and it's from Creature Comforts Brewing Company. It's a taste of Athens, but you don't have to be in Athens to get it. Try some Classic City Lager here this weekend. It is good cold beer. All right, let me kind of run through a couple of things here. Big game in the league this week, Arkansas and Texas A&M, Jerry World. I think this game is interesting. I believe the best unit on the field for either team is the Texas A&M defense. That's why I think Texas A&M will win, despite the fact they're still playing their backup quarterback in Zach Calzada with the injury to Haynes King. But it is worth pointing out here, though, that in the presence of Calzada on the field, how he matches up on the other side with the Barry Odom defense, I think that's a pretty big deal there. I think watching that closely to see how Odom, who's former head coach in this league, was at Missouri, just a sharp mind, what he does to potentially befuddle a guy like Calzada, I think is going to be pretty important. So a lot of us are Pittman fans. A lot of folks kind of hope he pulls the upset because they just like Pittman, but also they like the idea of Arkansas kind of being a bigger game for Georgia next Saturday. Whatever your reason is, if you're either want Arkansas plus the points or you want Arkansas to win outright, seeing what the Odom defense does against the inexperienced Calzada, who is pretty clearly going to be the backup. King won the starting job resoundingly before he had to leave with injury in the Colorado game. Watching what Odom does against Calzada, big important part of that matchup. I saw where LSU coach Ed Orgeron has cast doubt on the idea that Derek Stingley will play when LSU goes to Mississippi State on Saturday. To me, this is a huge game for LSU, and obviously doesn't get any easier without Stingley. Stingley, by the way, who was really a far cry from himself in 2020 compared to where he was in his freshman season of 2019, and supposedly that was all supposed to change because of the fact that Bo Pelini was no longer defensive coordinator, and the new DC was going to have just better idea about how to use Elias Ricks and Stingley, the two very good cornerbacks for LSU. So I'm sure that for what's supposed to be a breakout year for Stingley, which, by the way, did not really happen in the UCLA game. Let's point that out. I'm a fan of Stingley's. I think he's a really good player. But, the LSU pass defense had big issues against Dorian Thompson-Robinson throwing the ball for UCLA in week 1. They got after the quarterback some, but when he had time to throw, he was beating LSU for big plays. One of the reasons why LSU lost. So, this is an LSU secondary that's still trying to find itself. And, Will Rogers, the Mississippi State quarterback, it seems like, speaking of finding himself, seems like he kind of has done that a little bit. So I guess I still kind of like LSU in the game. I think it's a game that LSU has to have. Otherwise, the 2019 National Championship really is ancient history. There is no steam left in the program from that really whatsoever. But if Stingley doesn't play, that makes things more difficult there. One more SEC through story to get to here just for a moment. I did see it was interesting that there's chatter about the quarterback situation there at Tennessee. Joe Milton has not played necessarily great. He's also been a little bit banged up, I think, there too. And so there's some talk of, well, maybe Milton's going to be replaced. But if he is replaced, it's not Harrison Bailey who would seem to step into that spot. That's the guy I've been kind of calling for as a way to build for the future of the Tennessee program. It sounds like if Milton were to be the guy that does not play on Saturday, it'd actually be Hendon Hooker, the Virginia Tech transfer, who ends up taking the reins for Tennessee at the quarterback spot. Heupel has said this week that he only wants to play one of his quarterbacks, doesn't want to play two healthy quarterbacks during the game. So we'll see if Milton can go, if they choose to go with Milton. And it sounds like if it's not Joe Milton, it may be Hendon Hooker, who just kind of has his chance to go out there and see what he can do against Florida. This is a Tennessee team that's actually moved the ball okay this year. They've scored plenty of points for the most part. Their defense is terrible, and that was expected to be. But a little bit of chatter about who the Tennessee quarterback is supposed to be after Joe Milton kind of looks like the same guy in Knoxville that he looked to be in Ann Arbor. Imagine that, but maybe quite possibly a little bit of a quarterback. I don't know if it's controversy because I don't know if anybody cares all that much, but at least a situation at quarterback there for the Tennessee Vols will make that your SEC through. And in the time we have left here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, want to deal with a couple of things here for a moment. First of all, the Ryder Cup has started in Kohler, Wisconsin, up there at the beautiful Whistling Straits. It's a great facility. I don't know that it's great for a Ryder Cup, frankly, because there's not a lot of room to gather around the fairways and the greens and the way you get that U.S. crowd typically roaring. I don't know if you're going to see as much of that this week because the beautiful course just doesn't lend itself for the crowd getting very, very close to the action here, but we'll see if that's the case. I did see this. Dogs on Tour is a really fun Twitter account to follow that kind of follows the PGA Tour golfers with UGA ties. They also retweeted this week some Georgia fans up there in Kohler, Wisconsin. So dog fans always traveling, expected to have large numbers in Nashville. Also pretty good contingent there in Kohler, Wisconsin there as well. Can we show this on the screen here for a moment? So it's at Free Carl Free on Twitter that shows the dog fans there in Kohler, Wisconsin saying repping the G and got a ton of Go Dogs. Of course, Harris English is in the Ryder Cup on the American team. He's not playing in one of the morning round sessions right now, but he is playing there. Good look at him there on the screen. It was also kind of cool to see this week at one of his press conferences, Kirby Smart gave a nice shout-out to Harris English, as English represents UGA while also representing the USA at the Ryder Cup. This is Kirby on Harris English.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, we got so many dogs on tour. It's really incredible what they've been able to do. And Harris stopped by practice not too long ago and brought his dad with him and his caddy, and it was great to see him out there. Really proud of what he's been able to do, and he's a great person, and he represents University of Georgia the right way. I know I love being around him. But we're pulling for him in the Ryder Cup. It's one of the most watched and coolest events there is in all of sports to me. I love it, so I'll be tuning in to see how he does.
So that gives you all you need to know, but the Ryder Cup, as busy as Kirby is, he's like, hey, still the Ryder Cup. Give me a Sunday morning. I'll watch some of those singles pairings or whatever else. So nice to hear Kirby still trying to pay attention to the Ryder Cup, even during the busyness of the college football season. Of course, speaking of Georgia fans a moment ago, I talked about those that have been lucky enough to travel up to Kohler, Wisconsin. Also, the last time Georgia was here in 2019 in Nashville for the Vanderbilt game, the entire stadium virtually was taken over by UGA fans. Kind of a perfect storm of season opener, holiday weekend, whatever else, you want to say about that. Just Georgia fans were just entire stadium was almost filled with Georgia fans. And I think there's some curiosity about how many Georgia fans there will be tomorrow. I guess tickets are a little easier to come by this time around, so that may suggest a little bit smaller number of Georgia fans making the trip up to Nashville for maybe a number of different reasons on that. But I did think it was kind of cool. I won't show you the full video here, but you should seek it out for yourself. The official Georgia football social media accounts in their hype video for the game this week had really a pretty cool shout out for Georgia fans in the stadium takeover last time around, and kind of made a big deal about how many Georgia fans were up there in Music City in Nashville and how much fun they all had. So I thought it was really kind of a classy thing for Georgia to shout out its own fans and its hype video for the game. And I do hope in Nashville we see a lot of Georgia fans tomorrow. And if you're on your way up there, I'm not going to be in the Music City very long. I won't be on Broadway tonight. I'll be doing high school football. But if you do see me, please stop by and say hello, because I'd love to say hello to you back. And hopefully we'll all enjoy the Dogs beating up on the Commodores come Saturday. And to close out the week here, speaking of lousy, stinking Gators, let's do a Gator hater roll call and give out some golden shoes. I have a couple to give out here today. Let's go ahead and throw the first one up on the screen. Our buddy Mad Dog, this is really funny. So if you're not watching in video, what you see is Dan Mullen looking through the rearview mirror. He's got the clown nose on, and there's like a collection of like Ronald McDonald's. Mad Dog says, when you're late to your own staff meeting, hashtag Gator hater, hashtag golden shoe. It takes a lot of work to do this. You got to get the clown nose on Mullen, although I'm sure that's no big stretch. Looking through the rearview mirror with the Ronald McDonald's right there. I guess we'll give a free plug to McDonald's for that. But good stuff for Mad Dog on that. You are a golden shoe winner. Also, our buddy Vince Nutt checks in to say a true Gator hater. The Georgia hat, the Gator over your shoulders. I'm always fascinated by these Gator hunter dudes. I mean, that's an alpha move if there ever was one. So a good job by Vince Nutt on that. Gator Hater Countdown, 36 days from right now. Y'all enjoy your weekend. I'll see you tonight in Warner Robins. See you tomorrow in Nashville, and hopefully it's a lot of good football. We'll talk about it Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll see you then. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. R.S. Andrews can do all that for you. They show up on time. They do work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is how R.S. Andrews is taking care of all of you here today. So we are going to be quick because I got 10,000 things to do. And I apologize for that, but we got to roll on a Friday. So let me get a few comments, and then we'll get ready to get out of here. I'll start on YouTube here today. Neil Calvino kind of hopping comment sections. He's over here on the YouTube side today, and that's always great to see. Michael Porter checking in. Glad to see that. Ed Hustis checking in here too. Jay Shipes also going back to the Sissy Blue line from Ed Orgeron about UCLA. That didn't work out too well. Jim McLaughlin brings up a pretty good point. I talked about having to Photoshop the nose on Dan Mullen. Jim says you may not have had to actually Photoshop that nose on Mullen. He just may wear that around casually during the week, and he may be kind of right about that. Thomas T-Bone enjoyed that there as well. Brian McPhail says Mill Creek and Grayson's going to be a really good game. Yeah, I'm very interested in how good Mill Creek has turned out to be. I saw them week 1. They were dominant in their game against Parkview, and now they set up late season against Collins Hill a chance for what's really going to be a very important football game there. Mill Creek has really turned out to be pretty good. Scott Pete concerned about the 11 a.m. local kick for Georgia against Vanderbilt. Yeah, if I had to guess, I mean, obviously you're always a little bit worried about the unusual start like that. But if I had to guess, this is a Georgia team that anytime there's like an obvious thing hanging over their head, they seem to be, they seem to be a little extra focused, right? It's like, you trust some of the leadership that Georgia has right now. I don't think guys like Lewis Seen are going to let this team sleepwalk through the game on Saturday. Plus, I mean, you think about like, okay, well, what about South Carolina in 2019? Yeah, Georgia seemed to be a little sleepy there that day, but also that was about the fact that Georgia just couldn't get anything going offensively. They were compiling some yards, but they kept turning the ball over. And, I think one of the things that keeps this team engaged is you don't go very far and very long without seeing Georgia get a sack. And that kind of provides its own level of juice, for the receivers, the pass-catching targets. You don't really go very long right now, at least the last couple of games you haven't, without Georgia making the big pass play. All of a sudden, the idea that you're going to fall asleep, that's true if it's a low-scoring game. That's true if it's a game that's absent of highlights. But if Georgia's kind of playing the way that it has the last couple of weeks, that's the kind of thing that provides its own level of engagement. That's the kind of thing that provides its own level of energy, and that energy can be contagious throughout the rest of the team. Let's see what else. CB still believes that Vanderbilt owes Georgia, and he thinks that Georgia may go out and take a pound of that flesh as revenge on Saturday. Could very well happen. Daryl Fleming checking in. Jermaine King wants me to channel my inner Jim Ross and talk about having a slobber knocker tonight. I'll see if I can work that in. The one thing I will not do, Jeff mentioned the idea of the Mike got a freshman for Kamwa, the terrific freshman running back for Warner Robins. While I would be tempted to, I guess, pay homage to the great one, Larry Munson, I will, out of respect, try to, anytime I'm calling a game, out of respect, I will try to avoid anything that could be viewed as an homage to Larry Munson, because honestly, you need to leave what is sacred sacred. So I will try my very best not to do that. Hopefully by accident, I won't do it either, but certainly intentionally, I would never try to channel Munson, because Munson's words should be left alone and they should speak for themselves. Let's see what else. Foster Moss, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Bearded Dog's got a really good idea. This is, for logistics, feasible reasons can't happen, but he says, how great would it be if last year's seniors come walking out with Georgia? That would be so much fun to see. That'd be so much fun to see. Let's see what else. Daniel Ross wants the Falcons to trade for Jake Fromm. They probably need to do something. Atlanta probably needs to do something. Bill Kelly says pregame is going to be screwdrivers tomorrow instead of beer. Yeah, I will say this. Like, I've never been a big Bloody Mary person, Bloody Mary guy. Like a lot of folks, you think about the early kickoff. They love the Bloody Marys. To me, if I want to drink, I don't want my drink mixed with food. And I feel like there's too much food in a Bloody Mary, just to be completely honest with you. So I'd be a little bit more of a screwdriver guy myself. Now, being a consummate professional, a member of the Coastal Elite Broadcast Media, I won't be allowed to imbibe or partake. But for those that are, I guess that's probably where I'd be on that there as well. Our buddy Bill Sanders, who's got the Warner Robins logo as his Facebook avatar, says he'll definitely be seeing me in the WR tonight. I'm looking forward to that, Bill. Can't wait to see you. And really looking forward to that. Nick Roundtree says, how big of a meltdown if Tennessee beats Florida? That'd be a pretty big meltdown. That'd be really, I think it'd be pretty close to a meltdown if Tennessee even kept it reasonably close. I really don't think Tennessee's good at all. So you would definitely be, talking about Florida, not quite, the same team 2 weeks in a row, if this Tennessee team has any chance of even keeping that reasonably close, because, boy, that is not what I think of Tennessee being capable of doing right now. How about Raymond Fossway? I've never heard of this. He says, I always add steak to my beer and blend it all up. Kills two birds with one stone. Are you being serious? I never know if sometimes people are joking or not. Do you really blend steak with beer? I mean, I don't mind drinking a beer with the steak. I've just never heard of doing it together. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina giving you the Tennessee still be playing I'll Be Home for Christmas. Yeah, very funny with that. Pete Williams says he honestly misses Michael Vick. Yeah, I mean, Vick was fun to watch, man. Vick was fun to watch. You can put his highlights up there with anybody. Let's see what else. Daniel Holt said about Clay Webb. Yeah, Webb had been hurt, and I think that injury probably put him behind, whether it be weight room stuff or whether it be just on-field development. I think the injury that Webb sustained, not only the injury kept him off the field, but I think the injury has also slowed down his development a little bit too. So I think that's where kind of things are with Clay Webb at the moment. Ryan Walker, there's some very nice things about what we do here. I appreciate that. Making a comparison to the great Myron Cope. Wow. Yeah, so I know Myron Cope, the inventor of the terrible towel. That is obviously high praise indeed, and I certainly appreciate that. Like, I'm one of these guys that, obviously I love Larry Munson, but whether it be Myron Cope or the other great broadcasters who've kind of, done this stuff in the past, I love the great old local play-by-play voice. I just love that. And for a lot of different reasons, you don't quite have that in the sport the way that you once did. I mean, you think about the landscape of the SEC, there aren't a lot of like really famous broadcasters in the way it kind of once was. You don't have as much of that as it used to. Of course, the guys doing the Georgia games do a great job. But, like the days of like Myron Cope and like, I'm blanking on the guy the Philadelphia Eagles used to have, but he was a great broadcaster. Of course, I guess you got Brent Musburger doing Raiders games now, so that's a pretty interesting radio voice there too. But some of those guys that were just great voices. I know the SEC Network's got a great documentary coming up. At least what I assume is going to be a really good doc, looking at some of those legendary play-by-play voices around the SEC. I think that's a really, really neat thing, and obviously to have you make the comparison to Myron is amazing. I certainly appreciate that. Eric DeVorncy says, take a camera guy to the dog walk. So I think what I may do this time, now I'm going to be on two wheels to even get there in time for the dog walk tomorrow. But I think what I'm going to do for the dog walk moving forward is, I think I'm going to shoot the dog walk and then like not do the show during the dog walk, but maybe shoot the dog walk and then do the show. It depends on how it kind of goes tomorrow. I may do it kind of like that. That's what I might, that's what I might do tomorrow. So we'll see about that. Demetrius Terry asking about Eric Gilbert. I think for right now, Demetrius, it's just way too early to know where this is going down with Gilbert. I just don't quite know, but there is like no news on the Gilbert front here at this moment. It's just kind of gone quiet, and so it's not going to be one of those things where like just magically with George Pickens, hey, look at that, he's out there running drills at practice. I'm guessing we're not quite on the verge of having that happen for Gilbert, but obviously I'd love to have the pleasant surprise. Mickey Brady says his Coffee Trojans playing Camden County. That's going to be a good game. It certainly is going to be a good game. Thomas T-Bone says, what time will you be live tomorrow? So we'll probably get going sometime around 10 a.m. Eastern time. That's probably what we'll do, about 10 a.m. Eastern time on that tomorrow, for a few minutes for our Kroger kickoff. Then we'll let you watch the game and then come back to you for our Dog Nation post-game show presented by the UGA bookstore after the game. So that will be good. Neil Calvino in here bragging about him being ambidextrous. That's actually kind of cool, though. Let's see what else. HR Picking Stuff says, can I take the long drink with my keto diet? We got long drink zero, right? That's 0 carbs, 0 sugar. That's got to work, right? I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, so I can't say one way or another, but that's got to be pretty good for that. Mickey Brady also said that coffee's in Warner Robins region. Yeah, I'm looking forward to region play here. Going to be really fun. Back to DawgNation.com. We're going to get ready to go. Mary says alcohol mixed with vegetables is wrong. Just way too healthy. Yeah, I mean, look. If I'm drinking, that means I'm trying to have fun, right? And these days in life, that's fewer and far between. So the last thing I want to do to ruin my fun is a vegetable. Like, I don't want any celery. I don't want any, I don't know. It's like old school people like put like onions in their vodka. Have you ever heard this before? I don't want anything like that in my drink. I don't want food in my drink. Even like some of like the fancy restaurants that'll put like bacon in their Bloody Mary. Like, I love bacon. I just want to dip it in a drink. That just seems really weird to me. But I'm also pretty weird myself. Jimmy Guthrie, glad to have you here. Says, I haven't commented in a while since I left Facebook, but I've been listening daily. Keep up the good work. Jimmy, I'm so happy to have you checking in, and welcome back to the comment section. Really happy that you're here. Rick also mentioning Darnell Washington. You may have to wait one more week on that. Ron Greger asking about, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. Ron says, what happens to Carson Beck? Is it inappropriate to ask about Eric Gilbert? Ditto for Scott Cochran. Thanks for keeping us well informed. So Scott Cochran tweeted the other day, kind of a nice, like a spiritual song, and I took that as a message that he's working to get right? I mean, he, had mentioned that he wanted to spend some time away from the game, kind of handle his mental health there for a little bit, and I took that tweet from Cochran the other day as a signal that work is still ongoing. It was kind of a little bit of a wink and a nod to the direction of those who care about him, and a little bit of an acknowledgement of what he's going to go through right now. So I took that as good news for his own personal health, but no indication one way or another about when he might be returning to Georgia anytime soon. As I mentioned with Gilbert a moment ago, I think the issue there is it's just kind of gone pretty quiet on that front. And, sometimes these things work out. Sometimes maybe they don't. I think it's way too early to say one way or another what may or may not happen with Eric Gilbert. But obviously we tend to wish him well as he's going through whatever it is that he's going through. But this is not like, as I mentioned before, like the George Pickens thing where, Pickens had been seen around Athens a lot. Pickens had been, kind of on the sideline. Then he's back in practice, and there's at least some movement around the Pickens story. There's a lot less of that seemingly with Gilbert, and I won't pretend to know what that means one way or another. But I don't think we're on the verge of hearing anything from Eric Gilbert, I guess is the point that I'm getting to there. And then on Carson Beck, this is one where I think I am just very different than a lot of you. I like Beck a lot. I think Beck is a really promising prospect. And yet I don't think it's necessarily controversial that he's not currently the backup quarterback for Georgia. And it seems as if he's not. It seems as if the backup quarterback for Georgia is Stetson Bennett, a guy who started games before at the SEC level. And I'm just sort of fine with that. I don't think that's any kind of statement about what Beck might eventually be. But Georgia's trying to win a championship right now, and experience at the backup quarterback spot matters there. As we said before, a big issue for Texas A&M in the game against Arkansas on Saturday is going to be how its beginning of the season backup Zach Calzada plays there. And think about Alabama right now. We talked about this on Cover 4 Live last night. I think you can make a case that Alabama's having to call its offensive plays with the mindset of they could be in some real trouble if Bryce Young, their current starter, were to get hurt. They don't have the depth at their quarterback room that Georgia seems to have right now. And I think it's affecting the way that Bill O'Brien's calling that Alabama offense. So Georgia has a much better situation than that. I think the Georgia fans ought to be grateful for that. I'm saying all of this to say that this has been kind of a long conversation with us here, where a lot of folks just think that I'm wrong for kind of shrugging this off, but it's really not controversial to me that Beck is not playing more than he is right now, nor is it some sort of indication that he eventually won't playing a lot more. Just for now, Georgia seems to value the experience that Bennett has, making him the number 2 quarterback in the event they need him to step back in for JT Daniels at some point, and I don't think that decision is unique to Smart. I think there are plenty of coaches around college football that would have made a similar decision. Jermaine King says, what about putting peanuts in RC Cola? I tell you, my dad loved that. That was the one person. My dad also did something else that was probably a little weirder than that. He used to always put salt in his orange juice, which I thought was really strange. And then it's kind of funny. So my dad always put like salt in his orange juice, and I thought that was really strange. But the bartender, like the head like mixologist at Marlowe's Tavern, told me one time that the secret ingredient to every great cocktail was saline solution, which is essentially salt. That he said that salt made any drink taste better. And that actually made me think about my dad, because he used to shake that salt shaker into his orange juice, which I thought was just very, very bizarre. But then later on, like this professional mixologist was like kind of saying the same thing. And then, so my dad would put the peanuts, and he liked RC Cola, but I always saw him put the peanuts, like those glass bottles, I'm talking about like the really old school, cool glass bottles of Coke, like the contour shape. He'd put the peanuts right there on top of that, kind of like, so for those of you that drink like the Coronas and stuff, or like the Mexican beers, and you put the lime in the like the bottle, like that's kind of what he did with the peanuts, and that's what he's talking about too, like putting the peanuts right there in the top. So I definitely saw my dad do that a lot when I was growing up, for sure. I guess it's kind of an old school thing. All right, we're gonna get ready to go. Good stuff. Thanks for being here, y'all. Appreciate all of it. Really, really thankful to have everybody's attention here. All right, good stuff. Y'all make sure that you join me tomorrow. I'll be in Nashville pregame for our Kruger kickoff, after the game for our DawgNation postgame show, presented by the UGA bookstore. Really look forward to seeing all of you there for that. Tonight on Peachtree TV and streaming at CBS46.com for one of our best games so far of the year between Warner Robins and Lee County. This is going to be a good one. Also, speaking of high school football coverage, you can get a lot more of that online this weekend at AJC.com. It's really, kind of in partnership and powered by Score Atlanta. So you can read a lot of that at Atlanta Journal-Constitution, AJC.com. Also, Braves magic numbers, 9? Is it down to 9 as the series with the Diamondbacks comes to an end? So follow them. Falcons on the road against the Giants on Sunday. And if you want some more of the more serious stuff there as well, the chatter about booster shots and kind of who needs to get one of those as we start thinking about, keeping ourselves healthy and safe in the coronavirus. Obviously, you can get all of the information you need on that online at AJC.com as well. Big thanks to R.S. Andrews, making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. R.S. Andrews will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. So check them out today. We'll see you back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and hope you have a great weekend, everybody.